The Aeons are beings of immense and unfathomable power. They are literal gods and are akin to living sentient concepts that draw power directly from the paths themselves. Most Aeons often go unchallenged because who in their right mind would ever go against a planet-sized being capable of splitting galaxies? For all their power though, the Aeons aren't entirely invincible and they can be killed. The story has hinted that there are three ways an Aeon can die, but the third has sort of been left to the imagination of the players. What exactly is this third way, and why has it been kept a secret? That's what we'll be discussing in this video. The third and presumably final method of how one may kill a god. Before we explore that in more depth, if you are interested in more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. I'm sure by now most of you are familiar with the Aeons and what they are. The gods of the Star Rail universe are currently the strongest beings in existence. They wield immense powers and can easily change the landscape of the cosmos itself if they so wished. But as I've mentioned, the Aeons aren't invincible. Many in the past have actually died, disappeared, or are currently presumed to be dead. For all their power, only the paths themselves are currently thought to be truly eternal. Information about the Aeons is scarce to say the least. Few mortals can claim to have received the gaze of one, and even fewer can be said to have received their blessings. The Aeons are fickle in their habits, and only so often cast their attention upon the mortals, let alone interact with them. This makes studying them near impossible, not only because of their immense scale, but also because they aren't particularly chatty. Only Herta and a group of the smartest people in the universe are even attempting to decode and understand the Aeons, though even that is done through a simulation rather than physically interviewing them or something. While we don't have much info on them, we do seem to have some exposition that relates to how they can be killed, and this comes to us as courtesy from Kafka and the Stellaron Hunters. Now, I don't know how she came about this information, likely from Elio, or if it's even trustworthy, but since it's the only piece of information about this we currently have, we'll have to take it at face value. According to her, humanity is aware of three ways an Aeon can die. The first is through the overlapping of concepts between different paths. Those that have conceptual similarities will begin to draw into one another, and the bigger or wider path will eventually engulf the smaller one and functionally assimilate it. She doesn't explicitly mention it, but it's implied that both the Aeon and path of the smaller concept are absorbed. This happened with Shipe and Enna, as when Shipe ascended, the path of harmony forcibly engulfed the path of order. The second way is through sheer force. See, despite being considered as gods, the Aeons aren't all calm and wise and often fight one another, especially when their paths or ideologies conflict. Lan is in an eternal game of tag with Yaoshe, Aha has in the past successfully blown up Akavili's train among other things, and Klipoth has been said to have killed off a few Aeons on their own as well. So as far as humanity is aware, an Aeon can be killed by another Aeon, and this often occurs in titanic multi-galactic battles. This seems like the most direct way an Aeon can die. The third method is never properly revealed, as before being able to explain the third and final method, Kafka gets distracted with the Ambrosial Arbor's resurrection, and we don't get to hear what it exactly entails. In truth though, it's very likely that it wasn't revealed due to it having something to do with Elio's plan. Now from this point forward, most of what I'm going to say are going to be just theories or guesses at what this third method is. So just be aware this isn't going to be law proven or anything. The first thing that comes to mind is that perhaps an individual with sufficient power can ultimately usurp the position of an existing Aeon, functionally removing them from their position and perhaps killing them. A Path Strider may gain enough access to the path itself to eventually have enough power to contest the position of an Aeon. The reason why I think this is possible is in part due to the Stellaron Hunters' plan. We know that they are trying to get the main character to eventually face off against Nanook. Perhaps by helping them build a big enough following and carefully planning out their power-ups, the main character might eventually accumulate enough power to challenge an Aeon, in this case Nanook. If the Hunters are trying to avoid the destruction of the universe entirely, usurping Nanook may be the only way. Killing Nanook doesn't really solve the problem since the next Aeon of Destruction may just continue their work due to the Path of Destruction's primer mobile. Of course, this may also apply to the main character, but since we know they are artificially created to fulfill this role, maybe the main character has some sort of control measure built in that would allow them to circumvent the primer mobile, and why they want the main character on the throne of destruction. I mean, the main character has already done something with little to no precedent by housing an entire Stellaron, so crazier things have happened. There's also the fact that most of the Aeons gain their powers directly from the path. So if someone can draw out the same amount of path energy, it should allow them to feasibly challenge the Aeon or at least be on the same level. The second idea I have is one where an Aeon dies not because they are killed or usurped, but rather because the concept or idea behind their path evolves, changes, or becomes obsolete. Take beauty for example, which may be a rather subjective concept. Perhaps as mortals evolve and change, their view or understanding of concepts such as this changes with them. Given paths are a collection of imaginary energy taken at least in part from the consciousness of sentient mortals, there is a possibility that these disparate thoughts can influence it somewhat. If enough in the universe change their understanding of a particular concept, perhaps the presiding Aeon becomes no longer relevant and loses their access to the path until another person more suitable can ascend. This might explain why some Aeons have disappeared under mysterious circumstances despite their path still existing. Of course, equally likely is the possibility that the Aeon may just evolve alongside the path rather than needing to be replaced. The reason I think that's less likely is most stories about how the Aeons ascend have something to do with strong beliefs or emotions that the pre-ascended person might have. So it seems less likely they would simply change their initial ideals or goals that allowed them to become Aeons in the first place. An alternative variation to this idea is if the Aeons instead end up fulfilling their goal. Now, we don't currently know what the medium or methodology for ascension is when it comes to the Aeons, but as I've mentioned, it's hinted that most Aeons used to be mortals. My guess is that when an individual reaches a certain level of belief, or if they have an overwhelming desire to accomplish or do something, those mortals may end up ascending. If this were the case, what would happen if they essentially fulfill their initial wishes or goals? Take Akavili for example, who was said to have had an intense desire for exploration and wanted to search for the age of existence itself. If Akavili did end up reaching their goal, would they still exist? Another example is Klipoth, who is building all these random constructs throughout the universe. When their cosmic project finally completes, would there still be a need for them? I suspect, and I use that word strongly here, that those Aeons that have fulfilled their goals eventually either die off, disappear, or maybe perhaps even return to being mortals. It just might not seem possible from a mortal perspective due to these Aeons having such ambitious and long-term goals that they may appear to the mortal eye as being functionally eternal. Nanook wanting to destroy everything isn't a goal we can see happening too soon, but if they did accomplish it, I'd assume there would be no need for them to exist any longer. So perhaps Aeons who achieve their goals simply just return to the path and people just assume they were absorbed or killed. Finally, there is one other way I could think of that may lead to the death of an Aeon, but it's a bit of a tall order. Given the Aeons are conceptual beings in nature and are tied to their paths, what if one were to destroy the underlying concept of that path? Now hear me out. Let's say for example, we take the path of nihility, which exists because IX views existence as pointless. If you've watched my video on the nihility factions, you'll know that there is a group called the Doctors of Chaos, who are trying to convince IX that life is indeed worth living. What would happen if they succeeded in their plan? Would IX lose its purpose for existing? I'd imagine that this would lead to its ultimate demise, as it doesn't have a reason to be the Aeon anymore. An even harder approach to this is if you manage to change the thoughts of every sentient creature so that the path can no longer be sustained. Imagine if you brainwashed every sentient creature to no longer feel emotions of anger, hatred, and destruction, all of which feed into the path of destruction. Would the path of destruction and thus its Aeon be then starved of imaginary energy? I would like to think the answer is yes, but whether you can achieve that is a whole other issue. So there are several possibilities as to what this final method of killing an Aeon is, And given it's likely tied to an important part of the story, it's unlikely that we will get an answer anytime soon. As I bring this video to an end, I'd just like to remind everyone again that these are merely random theories and not substantiated in any way. We know too little about the Aeons and the way Star Rail universe works to make a truly accurate prediction. On top of that, Kafka may very well just be lying or withholding information, and perhaps there are numerous other ways to kill an Aeon. Perhaps he just wants us to think that only a fixed amount of options are available, so we are forced to walk on those paths in line with Elio's plan. Who really knows? But that unceremoniously brings the video to an end. If you have any alternative ideas on what this third method may be, feel free to share them in the comments. If you found the video entertaining, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.